Imagine standing on a battlefield where nearly an entire army has been wiped out. The air reeks of blood, dust, and fear. Rome has suffered one of the worst defeats in its history. Over 50,000 Romans lie dead, butchered by a man they believed unstoppable, Hannibal Barca. At the center of this disaster, a teenager barely out of boyhood survives the massacre. His name is Publius Cornelius Scipio. He should have died that day, just like his friends, commanders, and even close relatives. But fate spared him. And this moment would ignite a fire that would one day lead him to become the man who destroyed Hannibal himself. This is the story of Rome's greatest revenge, a tale of genius versus genius, obsession versus obsession, and the clash of two civilizations locked in a struggle for survival. It begins in 216 BCE during the Second Punic War. Hannibal, commander of Carthage, has already crossed the Alps with his war elephants, shocking the world. He has humiliated Rome at the Trebia River and Lake Trasimene. But now, at Cannae, he delivers his masterpiece. The Romans, desperate to crush him once and for all, send a massive army of nearly 90,000 men. Hannibal faces them with barely half that number. On open ground, Rome expects an easy victory. Instead, Hannibal unleashes one of the most brilliant maneuvers in military history, the double envelopment. Rome's enormous army presses forward, swallowing Hannibal's deliberately weak center. Then his elite troops snap shut on the Roman flanks, while his cavalry storms from the rear. The largest army Rome ever assembled is trapped, squeezed, and annihilated. When the slaughter ends, 50,000, 70,000 Romans are dead. Senators, generals, and noblemen lie lifeless in the dust. It is Rome's darkest day. Among the survivors is young Scipio. He has just witnessed the annihilation of his country's finest soldiers, men who were supposed to protect Rome itself. Many survivors whisper of fleeing, of abandoning the hopeless fight against Hannibal. But Scipio explodes in fury. According to legend, when he caught noble officers plotting to abandon the Republic, he drew his sword and swore to kill them himself if they dared to desert. This fiery loyalty, born from disaster, marks Scipio as different from the rest. Even as Rome reels in despair, he vows never to give up, never to surrender. Hannibal may have crushed Rome's armies, but he cannot crush Rome's will, at least not while Scipio lives. After Cannae, Hannibal expected Rome to beg for peace. Most nations would have. Carthage had handed them a defeat so devastating that surrender seemed inevitable. But Rome was not like other nations. Instead of giving in, the Senate scraped together new armies, even arming boys, slaves, and criminals. Rome's leaders declared, "We will fight until Hannibal is destroyed." When Hannibal sent Roman captives to negotiate ransom, the Senate refused to pay. Those men would rot in slavery, because Rome had no intention of admitting weakness. It was a brutal message. Rome would fight to the bitter end. And while Hannibal waited for Rome to collapse, the Republic began to adapt. Rather than meet Hannibal in open battle, Rome turned to a new strategy, one of patience and attrition. Quintus Fabius Maximus, nicknamed the Delayer, refused direct confrontation. His armies shadowed Hannibal, cutting his supply lines, harassing his allies, but never offering the decisive battle Hannibal craved. This strategy infuriated Romans who hungered for vengeance, but it worked. Hannibal was left stranded deep in enemy territory, far from Carthage, with dwindling resources. His dream of forcing Rome to surrender was slipping away. At the same time, Rome opened a new front in Spain, where Hannibal's brothers commanded Carthaginian armies. By threatening Carthage's overseas empire, Rome hoped to weaken Hannibal's support at home. Rome dispatched two commanders, Publius Scipio, the father of our young survivor, and his brother Gnaeus Scipio. Together, they fought a brutal campaign against Carthaginian forces in Iberia. At first, the Scipios scored victories, cutting into Carthage's control of the region. The Carthaginian armies, commanded by Hannibal's brothers Hasdrubal and Mago, struggled to contain them. But Carthage struck back. Hasdrubal cleverly used mercenary bribes and surprise attacks to trap the Roman commanders. In one disastrous campaign, both Scipio brothers were killed. Almost overnight, Rome's position in Spain collapsed. Their armies were shattered, their commanders dead, and Iberia seemed lost. For Rome, it was another crushing blow. But for young Publius Cornelius Scipio, it was personal. He had now lost his father and uncle to this war, and he would not let their deaths be in vain. After the disaster in Spain, Rome needed a new commander. The Senate debated furiously who would dare take command of such a hopeless situation. Then, something astonishing happened. Publius Cornelius Scipio, barely in his early 20s, volunteered to lead. Too young, too inexperienced, the senators scoffed. But Scipio's determination was unshakable. He swore to avenge his father and uncle and to turn Spain into the graveyard of Carthaginian ambition. Against all odds, the Senate agreed. The soldiers, too, were captivated. Many had seen him at Cannae. They knew this wasn't just another nobleman chasing glory. This was a man who carried the weight of Rome's survival on his shoulders. Scipio's first move stunned everyone. Instead of cautiously rebuilding, he struck straight at New Carthage, Carthage's most important stronghold in Spain. The city was thought impregnable, surrounded by walls and guarded by a lagoon. But Scipio had studied the terrain. He realized that at low tide, part of the lagoon could be crossed on foot. At dawn, while Roman forces attacked the main walls, Scipio sent a secret strike force across the lagoon. The defenders never expected an assault from that side. The Romans stormed the city in a single day. Inside, Scipio captured vast supplies of weapons, silver, and hostages treasures Carthage had relied upon for years. But instead of cruelty, Scipio shocked the world with mercy. He returned the hostages to their tribes unharmed. Instantly, Spanish allies began flocking to Rome. It wasn't just a victory of arms, it was a victory of psychology. Scipio studied Hannibal's tactics obsessively. He understood that to defeat Carthage, Rome couldn't just fight the old way. He reorganized the Roman legions, making them more flexible, more mobile, and deadlier in open battle. At Becula, he faced Hasdrubal, Hannibal's brother. Using the terrain, Scipio launched a sudden flanking assault down the hillsides, catching the Carthaginians off guard. Though Hasdrubal escaped, the Romans triumphed, proving that Scipio was no longer the student. He was becoming the master. But Hasdrubal wasn't finished. He decided to abandon Spain and march to Italy to join his brother Hannibal. If the two combined forces, Rome itself might finally fall. Hasdrubal led his army across the Alps, retracing his brother's legendary path. But this time, Rome was ready. At the Battle of the Medurus River, Roman legions intercepted him. Hasdrubal's army was crushed. In a chilling act of psychological warfare, the Romans decapitated Hasdrubal and hurled his severed head into Hannibal's camp. Imagine Hannibal that night, staring at his brother's head by the fire. For years he had dreamed of conquering Rome, But now he knew the dream was dying. Reinforcements would never come. Meanwhile, Scipio pressed his advantage. Battle after battle, city after city, he swept Carthaginians from the Iberian Peninsula. He had not only avenged his father, but carved out Rome's dominance in Spain. The Senate back in Rome could hardly believe the reports. This young general had done what seasoned commanders had failed to do for decades. He had broken Carthage's grip on Iberia forever, and his ambition was only growing. By now, Scipio was famous. When he returned to Rome, the people adored him. He was elected consul at just 30 years old, far younger than the traditional age. But Scipio had bigger ideas than just defending Italy. He argued that the only way to end the war was to strike at Carthage itself. Rome must invade Africa, force Carthage onto the defensive, and drag Hannibal back from Italy. The Senate hesitated. Many were terrified. Even the great Fabius Maximus, the cautious strategist, warned that such an invasion was reckless. But Scipio's charisma and vision won out. He would take the fight directly to Carthage's doorstep. To prepare, Scipio did something remarkable. He gathered the survivors of Cannae, the disgraced soldiers who had been living in shame for years. These were men branded as cowards, men Rome had abandoned. But to Scipio, they were not cowards. They were survivors who longed for redemption. Under his leadership, these broken men found new purpose. Alongside veterans, volunteers, and allies, Scipio forged one of the most loyal and determined armies Rome had ever seen. This was no ordinary army. It was an army of vengeance. When Scipio landed in North Africa, he wasted no time. He struck at Carthage's allies, sowing chaos across the countryside. Then came one of the boldest moves of the entire war. In a surprise nighttime assault, Scipio infiltrated the massive Carthaginian and Numidian camps. He set them ablaze, slaughtering tens of thousands in the fire and confusion. It was a catastrophic blow. Carthage's armies burned in their tents. The city itself trembled with fear. Desperate, Carthage recalled its greatest weapon, the man who had haunted Rome for nearly 2 decades. Hannibal Barca was coming home. For nearly 16 years, Hannibal had roamed Italy like a ghost. He had destroyed Roman armies, terrorized the countryside, and become the stuff of legend. But despite all his brilliance, Rome never surrendered. And now, Carthage was in mortal danger. The Senate of Carthage sent an urgent message: Hannibal must return. Reluctantly, he sailed back across the Mediterranean, leaving behind the land where he had come so close to glory. As his ships approached the harbor, Hannibal was no longer the unstoppable conqueror of Cannae. He was older, weary, and burdened by defeat. But he remained Rome's most dangerous enemy. And one final battle would decide the fate of the ancient world. Before blood was spilled, Scipio and Hannibal met face to face in a legendary parley. Picture the scene: 2 of the greatest minds in military history, sitting across from each other in silence. Hannibal, the veteran genius who had once shattered Rome's armies, and Scipio, the young commander who had risen from disaster to challenge him. They spoke of peace, of compromise, but both knew the truth words would not decide this war. Only steel and strategy would. When they parted, the world held its breath. The stage was set for Zama. On the plains of North Africa, 2 armies assembled. Carthage fielded perhaps 50,000 men, including Hannibal's terrifying war elephants. Rome's army, led by Scipio, was of similar size but brimming with confidence. Hannibal arranged his elephants in front, hoping to smash Rome's lines before the battle even began. But Scipio was ready. He had studied Hannibal's methods for years. At his command, the Roman soldiers opened corridors in their formation. When the elephants charged, instead of crashing into the legions, they thundered harmlessly through the gaps. Driven away by blaring horns and showers of missiles, the beasts panicked, trampling Hannibal's own men. His opening gambit had failed. Now came the infantry. Hannibal's veterans, men who had fought beside him in Italy, slammed into the Roman legions. The ground shook with the clash of steel, the screams of the wounded, the thunder of drums and horns. For hours, the outcome hung in the balance. Hannibal's soldiers fought like demons, determined to give their commander one last chance at victory. But Scipio's reforms and discipline held strong. Then, at the perfect moment, Scipio unleashed his cavalry, commanded by his ally Massinissa, king of Numidia. They swept around the flanks, crashing into the Carthaginians from behind. Hannibal's army was surrounded, the same fate he had once inflicted on Rome at Cannae. The slaughter was merciless. Carthage's army disintegrated, tens of thousands lay dead. And with that, the war was over. Carthage sued for peace. The terms were brutal. Carthage was stripped of its fleet, forced to pay massive reparations, and forbidden from waging war without Rome's permission. The once proud empire was reduced to a shadow of itself. Rome, meanwhile, stood supreme. The Republic had survived its darkest hour and emerged as the master of the Mediterranean. And at the center of it all was Scipio. He was hailed as a hero, granted the title Scipio Africanus, the conqueror of Africa. The boy who had survived Cannae had become the man who avenged it. And Hannibal? He lived on, but his power was broken. Carthage, now weak and humiliated, turned on him. Fearing Roman demands, Hannibal fled into exile. For years he wandered the courts of foreign kings, still admired, still feared, but always hunted by Rome. In the end, when Roman agents closed in, he chose poison over capture. According to legend, his final words were bitter. "Let us now free Rome from her long anxiety, since she finds it too tedious to wait for the death of one old man." With that, the greatest enemy Rome had ever faced was gone. The rivalry of Scipio and Hannibal is remembered as one of the greatest duels in history. Both were military geniuses, both shaped by fire and blood, and both forever linked by the clash at Zama. Hannibal showed the world the limits of raw brilliance. He could win battles, but not the war. Scipio proved that Rome's strength was not just in soldiers, but in resilience, adaptation, and unbreakable will. In the end, it was not just one man's victory. It was Rome's survival, Rome's revenge, and Rome's rise to empire. Rome had faced extinction, but out of its darkest defeat rose its greatest general. And because of him, Rome would not just survive it, it would rule for centuries. But here's a question. If Hannibal had received reinforcements, if Carthage had stood behind him fully, could history have been reversed? Could Rome have fallen, and Carthage ruled the Mediterranean instead?